Bruchim Aboyim to the 18th and continuing series of lectures on the 13 Articles of Faith of Maimonides, that is the Yud Gimel Ikkarim of the Rambam, as he writes in his introductory to the commentary of to his commentary on the Mishnah to Parachelis chapter Chelik in Sanhedrin. We're up to now the 18th principle of faith, and I'm once again going to be reading from the translation of Yitzchak Shilat on Daf Kuf Mem Hey in his Sefer Domois HaRambam La Mishnah, and we're on Yesod HaShnei Masar. So says the Rambam, Yesod HaShnei Masar is Yemais Mashiach. Actually, Yemais Mashiach is the Messianic era. Interesting. V'hu la'amin, and this principle of faith is to believe, Sheyavoy v'lo ya'acher, that he will come and he will not tarry. Im yismama chakeloi. In other words, it reads a pasuk in Chavakuk, which says that even if he seems to, he's taking this, in other words, in Hameya, that he's not coming quickly, nonetheless you have to wait for him. Below yusam lo kates kotsuv. It says the Rambam, you shall not set a certain date. You shouldn't say that Mashiach will come on a certain date, but rather, even if he seems to tardy, nonetheless you should wait for him. And you shouldn't explain the different scriptures in order to draw out from the scriptures the time is going to come. Chachamim say, the Gemara now is quoting from Chazal in Sanhedrin, Tafuach daiton l'machashvei kitzur. The Gemara basically attacks those people who are called machashev haketz. They make timelines and dates for the Mashiach's coming. Okay, so that's the first part of the Rambam. And it's interesting that the Rambam goes on. So up to now, the Rambam really hasn't said much about belief. In fact, actually, if we look at the Rambam, all the Rambam has said is we have to believe that he's going to come. And this is v'lo ya'acher. What does that mean? Is that he'll come when he's supposed to come. And even though it seems to us that he's late in coming, right? This is not something that we should be concerned ourselves with. Now, but after that, the Rambam doesn't speak about what we're supposed to believe in. And then goes on the Rambam, and this certainly has nothing to do with faith. We have to believe in his greatness. And then v'havasai, I would say there's a comma should be there. To believe in his greatness. And then v'havasai, that we our longing for him. Fatfila Allah. And we're supposed to pray that he comes. In other words, it's interesting that the Rambam includes in the Ikkarim that we're actually not supposed to believe in his greatness, but actually we're supposed to actually long for his coming and pray for his coming. Gefi ma sheduba boy ayedei called David and Shlomo in accordance with what has been said by all the Nevi'im, from Moshe Rabbeinu until Malachi. We'll say this a little while. Okay, now, Umi shematul boy safek, whoever casts doubt, or bezalzel devoy, or any person who, in fact, actually confuses or distorts, or in fact, in any way degrades the notion of Mashiach. Mechazev haTorah asher yoda voy b'feirosh. This is heresy. In fact, it's degrading the Torah, which has explicitly spoken about him, and where the Torah explicitly spoken about him in Parshas Bilam. Torah spoken about in Parshas Bilam, and also in Parshas Batem Nitzavim. Okay? Umiklal Yesod Esed, and included in this article of faith, in this Yesod, is Ki Ein Melech Yisrael Ela Midavid. What part of this is that the kingdom in Israel can only be from Beis David, Umizera Shlomo B'yichud, and from David HaMelech has to be Shlomo, his son. Whoever argues on the lineage of Mashiach, namely that not only he's from David and Melech, but also he's from Shlomo Melech, right? Chayfa B'Hashem, right? He's a heretic, right? This constitutes heresy against the Kodesh Baruch Hu of the Divrei Nevi'im, and the words of his prophets. This is the language of the Rambam. Now, as I mentioned, in the Rambam, there is not really so much belief. Let me qualify that. In other words, the Rambam says, I have to believe the Mashiach is going to come, and then, this is what the Rambam says, and I have to believe that the Mashiach is going to come from David and Melech and from Shlomo. That's what the Rambam says. But the fact is that most of what the Rambam says over here has nothing to do with belief. The Rambam, after the opening sentence, right, goes on and emphasizes the fact that we shouldn't set a date for his coming, we have to wait for him, and that we shouldn't, in fact, draw out from the scripture when he's going to come. Now, that's not really, in a certain sense, belief. It's not belief, it's not intellectual belief, but I think really it's more mussar. Right? And the fact is that what the Rambam is saying over here is really what he says in the Mishnah Torah. The Rambam says that in Perek Yud Beis, which is the last parak in the Mishnah Torah, says the Rambam, right, that the Dvarim Stum Eitz LaNeviim. In other words, the Rambam says, all these things that Chazal say about Mashiach, similar. No one knows how they're going to be until they happen. Because these things are hidden. Even in the prophets speak about it, but the exact details are hidden. Even Chazal, says the Rambam, have no tradition. Chazal basically looked at the pesukim and they drew from pesukim what they thought. But in fact, what? Says the Rambam, Chazal had no real Kabbalah, no tradition of what is going to take place in the Messianic era. Says the Rambam, because of this, we see disputes about Chacham. The Rambam is going in accordance with what he says in many places. In particular, we spoke about this in the 8th Ikar. The Rambam says in the Perush Mishnayos that on that which there is a dispute about Chachamim, for sure there cannot be any mussar. So since if a person opens up the Gemara Sanhedrin and sees that on just about every detail there's a dispute about Chachamim, and every reading the pasuk, so says the Rambam in the same way that in fact there cannot be a mussar, because there cannot be a mussar, says the Rambam, on that we cannot claim as the mussar on something in which there was a dispute among Chazal. So the Rambam here is going shitasa in what we spoke about in Yosef Hashmini.
Is one of those opinions in the Chazal correct? Are they...
Once again, there's no tradition. So, and we'll see. Says the Rambam, the way events are going to happen, this is not the important thing in the Jewish religion. It's not Ikar Badas. It goes on the Rambam and says, a person should engage himself in these Haggadahs. He shouldn't speak about all the midrashim and speak about these things. I know that most people spend most of their lives in drashas on these things. He should make this the center, right, of his Jewish life, his Jewish consciousness. They don't bring to love, they don't bring to fear, right? They probably bring to, at best, disappointment, at worst, we'll see, apikosis. A person shouldn't make dates. This is what the Rambam says. Okay? So, in other words, here the Rambam, what the Rambam is doing actually in the Seder Shneimasa is actually paraphrasing, right, what he says in the Mishnah Torah. So, in other words, says the Rambam, the belief is only that he's going to come. When is he going to come? How is he going to come? That's not part of what we have to believe. And moreover, says the Rambam, since we have no tradition on these things, right, a person should engage himself in this. Okay, now, so far and so good, right? But it's interesting though that, in fact, the Rambam not only is telling me what I should believe, but the Rambam is also telling me what I should not engage myself in, and thinking that I have to believe, because, in fact, these things are not things that are possible to believe, given the fact that we have no tradition on it. Now, says the Rambam in the next sentence, "Ulahame b'dulasai, v'ya'avasu v'atfila olav, k'fi ma sheduba boy al yedei kol navi Moshe Malachim." Now, what's interesting, the Rambam is saying here is, the way I understand the Rambam is, "La'amin b'dulasai," to believe in His greatness. And then it says, "Va'ahavasai." I understand, avasai should not be read as to believe, right, in His love, but rather, "Lahami b'dulasai." In other words, I have to believe in His greatness. That's an issue of belief. Va'avasai. A person should be drawn to love the Messianic era, to long for the Messianic. Va'tfila love, and a person should pray for this. And in fact, this is actually part of what the Rambam says in the beginning of the 11th parak in Hilchot Melachim. He says in Halacha Aleph of Parak Chadasar, "Hamelach Mashiach also lamoy latzim malchus beis David liyashkol hamshalom rishonu b'nei mikdash b'kam tichei Yisrael." Like the Mashiach is going to come and bring back malchus beis David, build a beis hamikdash, and gather the Jewish people. Okay. And wait. Let's hold on, right? V'chol mi she'einu mamin bo, and whoever doesn't believe, or mi she'einu mechakel b'yasai, right? Or doesn't await His coming. Lo b'shar neviim b'lvad hu kayfer l'bateres of Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, the Rambam understands that part of Mashiach is not only the belief that He's going to come, but a person actually has to await His coming. So, in other words, I'm sure the Brisker would say that we actually have two halachas in Mashiach. We have a halacha of belief, and we have a halacha of awaiting for Him. And the Rambam actually, but I think this, I'm sure this would be the Brisker notion of understanding the Rambam here, but in fact, the Rambam, this thing with the Rambam is actually repeated in many places. For example, the Rambam says in Hilchot Teshuva, where he also speaks about Mashiach, the Rambam says, speaks about that the Mashiach is going to come and present a new world order where it will be more, the man will have more of an opportunity to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it will be a preparation for what the Rambam says is Olam Haba. And the Rambam says in Parak Tes Halacha Bey, says the Rambam, we see that for this reason the Nevi'im and the Chachamim all longed for the coming of the Mashiach. So therefore they were able to take respite from the evil kingdom. It doesn't allow the Jews to engage themselves in Torah study and in mitzvahs. This is in Parak Tes Halacha Beis. Okay? So therefore, the Rambam emphasizes, right, is that, in other words, not only is the person supposed to believe, but the Rambam mentions, and I think here he says that, he's taking historical fact, but the fact is that the Rambam emphasizes that not only am I supposed to believe, but I'm supposed to long for the coming of the Mashiach. So in other words, in the beginning, the Rambam says, Mechakala just means that he shouldn't put a certain date at which it's going to come. It's called Mechashav HaKitzim. But moreover, now that Shainam Mechashav HaKitzim, I'm supposed to long for him. And this is, in fact, actually what the Rambam says, right? In Halacha Dalet, in the 12th parak, which I was reading, the Nevi'im and Chachamim did not long for the Mashiach, not that he should rule over the world, right? But rather that people will be penuyim b'Torah v'chachmasa. So in other words, we see over clearly that the Rambam understands there's two aspects of Mashiach. There's the belief and there's the longing for the Mashiach. And that's what the Rambam emphasizes. La'amim b'dulasa, to believe in his greatness, meaning that he's going to, right? Kama, v'avosoi utfila alav. Things that we're supposed to love, await, and we're supposed to act with, we're supposed to act in accordance with longing for his coming. And in fact, actually, the Rambam the Rambam says that this is Kfir Moshe Rabbeinu. And says, the Rambam, I'm now quoting once again from Halach Aleph of Perachad Ikar, Sharei HaTorah Olav Shneimar, V'sham Hashem L'kecha Shavuzcha, V'rachamech, V'sham Betzach Kol Ha'omim, and that's in Parshas Nitzavim. And then it speaks about Parshas Bilam, right? Right? And it speaks about there two Mashiachs, Mashiach Harishon, Shudavid, Shesh Yisrael, Mashiach Ha'achron, Shemo Yibonu, V'shamesh Yisrael, Miyad B'nei Esav. V'sham Ha'omer, Einu V'loi Ata Zeh David. Ashuv L'kol Zeh Melech HaMashiach. So the Rambam says it explicitly in Halach Aleph. There's two places in the Torah itself where in fact actually is mentioned the Mashiach, by Bilam and also too in Parshas Nitzavim. Okay? Now,
how does Rambam, for example, does not mention Mashiach ben Yosef? Even though
he speaks about, well, I think what's interesting is he speaks about Mashiach Achrei, which I don't, Mashiach Achrei, but he doesn't mention Mashiach ben Yosef, but it would appear that the Gemara in Sukkah, which speaks about Mashiach ben Yosef, just brings from pesukim. Chazal says this is Mashiach ben Yosef. We don't see anywhere in Chazal a person is required to believe in Mashiach ben Yosef.
If Rambam says that Chazal had no mussar on it and there's no, how can he have an opinion about what Mashiach will be or won't be?
Right?
How can Rambam have an opinion about Mashiach if he himself said there's no mussar on it?
Well, first,
how can he say nothing will change when Mashiach comes?
Well, I understand what he said.
Rambam says we don't know what will happen when Mashiach comes.
Right.
And then he goes and tells us what will happen when Mashiach comes. Nothing will change from the Seder.
No. So there the Gemara. So there the Gemara. No. First of all, there the Rambam's passing like a Gemara. The Gemara that the Gemara that Flamdel and the Beis and Machos, they had the Machos of Yechel and Shmuel.
Right.
So there the Rambam's passing like Shmuel.
But how can he pass him? I'm saying if there's no mussar, how can he pass him like one over the other? How can Rambam say one is right and one is wrong when he himself says neither of them have a mussar?
So what I think, right, you're asking a good question, okay? So what I think the answer is like this. That was your question? I'm sorry. Okay. So let's take the question again. In other words, if in fact there's no Messiah, so how can the Rambam speak about it? Like the Rambam says in the beginning, let me just strengthen the question, right? Or elaborate the question. The Rambam says, we shouldn't think the Melech Shalom will change, or by separations, and right? So like it says, it brings a pasuk Yeshaya, right? And the pasuk doesn't mean, right? The pesukim are speaking really metaphorically that Yisrael Yeshev Levetach, and in other words, when the Rambam was speaking against Rabbi Yochanan, that there won't be a change in nature, but rather the pesukim in Yeshayahu that speak about change in nature are only a mashal, only a metaphor. Okay? And then right? Etc., etc. So the question is, if this is true, in fact, actually, how does the Rambam know this? Okay, so first of all, I think there are two things here that are important. The first thing is that the Rambam, right, understands, and this is what actually was an Ikar too. And you say that the Rambam says that this term will not be bevotel, will not right. Now the Rambam actually says in Parag Chadasav, right, that Mashiach. Rambam speaks about the Navi will make a moifus, right? And Rambam says, right? Torah is not going to change. Right? right? And it was the Rambam is makes a point here that the Torah is not going to change, right? And that's actually you say that Achi, right? And then the Rambam goes on, right? The Rambam goes on as the Jewish people, the purpose of Mashiach, right? Is he'll be Miyaches Shevet Levi, Miyaches Yisrael. This is a halacha gimel. Aval ein Omar Shem because Ksher is a mamzer. He's not going to change the halacha. I understand. The Rambam understood that Shmuel's din. The end being Yosef and Mashiach. El Shmuel Zavad means not only is it not going to be a change in nature, it's not going to be a change in the halacha.
Rabbi Yochanan held it the other way.
That's what Shmuel's saying. It's like Rambam Pasuk Shmuel. In other words, the Rambam understood two things. And number one, the Mashiach is not going to involve any change of nature. And I understand as part and parcel of that is that the halacha won't change. One might argue that a change in nature, a change in the states of the world would bring about a change in the halacha. So in other words, it could be that the Rambam understood Shmuel's dictum as including that which he rules in the Yisod HaTshi. That nothing's going to change, everything's going to be the same. And things are going to be the same, something's going to be the same too. Because if you look, for example, at other Rishonim, right, for example, the Ritva in Samazayim and Beis and Nida, he speaks about two opinions whether there will be mitzvahs liyasid lavai. And especially the Ritva brings a second opinion, that liyasid lavai, right, the mitzvahs might change. And I understand part and parcel of that is because there will be a change in nature. So, in other words, what I understand from the Rambam is that Shmuel's dictum is part and parcel of the Yisod HaTshi. In addition to that, I would also say too, that the fact that the Rambam says that the world is not going to change is in fact actually very, very important for the Rambam, because if we go back even to the first Ikkarim, in the Yud Gimel Ikkarim, in which he spoke about the Mitzias HaBoirei, the existence of God, and Shlius HaGashmi Shaboy. In other words, and these are things that the Rambam proved. And the proof of these things, which were, as we spoke about, were Aristotelian, assumed the scientific Aristotelian view of the universe. In other words, if the universe will change and will go out of kilt, so what you've done is you might undo the foundations of which the Rambam's basic belief, which he understood to be rational, namely existence of God and the denial of anthropomorphism, is also falling too. In fact, actually, the Rambam in a famous Ikkarim, when he's asked, whether there will be actually a Tchias HaMesim or not, and we're going to speak about this in next year. But the Rambam understood that Tchias HaMesim will be a one-time event. Meaning that the Rambam, and I think the Rambam also says too in the Ger Tchias HaMesim, we try to bemayit miracles, nisim, as much as possible. I think this probably fits in with his entire view that the belief in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and particularly belief in God's incorporeality, which as we saw was based upon the assumption of the eternity of the world, is itself based upon the fact that the world will always go in accordance with natural law. So what you're asking me is that I understand that Shmuel's din is not just more than is just a limud from a pasuk, but contains within itself, it could possibly be the first three Ikkarim of the Rambam, and also the ninth Ikar of the Rambam too. That's what I would answer.
If I can restate that in a slightly controversial way.
Yes.
Rambam says Chazal's knowledge of Mashiach came from pesukim.
Right.
Basically, Rambam ignores the pesukim and goes with Aristotelian philosophy to define what's going to happen, to decide which of those opinions is going to be kaveya. He rejects all the pesukim as metaphorical.
Well, first of all, the ninth Ikar is not an Aristotelian philosophy.
But here in Mashiach, he rejects all of the pesukim and says they're all arrogant.
Right. I think.
And that's I'll smart the fact that for the
I wouldn't say the Rambam is rejected. The Rambam is saying that's what Shmuel is saying. That might be what Shmuel is saying. The Rambam learns that in Shmuel.
But why is he learning Shmuel, not Rabbi Yochanan?
Because you're right. No question about it. And we see that from the Rambam. In fact, the Rambam says belief in the actual Tchias physical is dependent upon, belief in the eternal world. Now, in fact, the Rambam it doesn't mention physical Tchias and which we'll speak about in the Mishnah Torah. The Kesef Mishnah knows that. Mm-hmm. He does mention the Gevis, right? But even that Tchias is a one-time thing. It's not a permanent thing. No, so I understand that the Rambam understood that Shmuel's limud was just limud from a pasuk, but more than that. What Shmuel is saying is an affirmation to what the Rambam said in 4 of the Ikkarim. And that was important for the Rambam. Okay, is that... okay, fine.
Now, we say that Shmuel has 4 Ikkarim that Rabbi Yochanan is over.
No, okay, fine. We'll speak about that. I'm not going to say it right now. It's clear that the Rambam passes like Shmuel. I saw there's a sefer called Imrei Noam, supposedly from the Gra. I'm sure the Gra didn't write it because it's for sure.
Anyone brachas.
And brachas, yeah, it's like, look, maybe some things they heard from the Gra, but for sure, I mean, whoever has learned the Gra knows that that's not the Gra. But whoever wants to say the Rambam brings actually 2 Mashiachs, Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. I mean, the Rambam even says Eliyahu Hanavi, you didn't know. The Rambam says over here. But I think that, in my opinion, there's someone made that up. I don't think any Talmud Chacham would like that. The Rambam and Kavod Chomer Hagoy. But I'm saying is that
where is that in the Imrei Noam?
I think it's probably in Daf. I think it's probably in Daf. You're based on Beis Gimel Aleph, when it says that on the Mishnah of Ben Zoyma. And there, in other words, it's clear that the Rambam understands that Yemeish is, and the Rambam states this, that Yemeish Mashiach is an opportunity for people. By the way, not to mention the fact is, if a parent will engage in Torah and Chachma, and for the Rambam Chachma also includes, physics, so it's going to be a change in nature. The Chachma, what Chachma we're speaking about. So, but in other words, I understand that this is Shmuel's dicta. Okay, let's go further. We went off on a tangent. Okay? But let's go further. Okay, in any case, the Rambam says, he brings, is Mechazer Batera Sheyoda by Befeirosh. In other words, the Rambam says, not like Kfira in the Led Nevim, it's Kfira Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's what the Rambam says in Perek Chalasar Halacha Aleph. Hilchot Melachim. Says the Rambam, "B'chol mi she'eino mamen boy, or mi she'eino mechakel b'yatso, lo b'shar neviim b'ladu koiva, el b'teira u'v'meisha Rabbeinu." And the Rambam says that there's kfira in Torah and Moshe Rabbeinu. And for this reason, the Rambam brings his pesukim. Now, the fact is that this is not just the Rambam wants this to be an Ikar of the Ikkarim, and in Hilchot Teshuva, the Rambam says in Perek Gimel Halacha Vav, the Rambam says, "Elu she'ein lahem chelek l'olam haba, elo nechrosin v'oidim v'doinim al goydel rishon v'chatosim l'olam l'obi alamim haminim apikosim hakoifim b'Torah hakoif b'chis hamesim v'hakoif b'vias hagoyel." In other words, the Rambam in Hilchot Teshuva mentions explicitly that a person who denies the coming of the Redeemer, the Vias Hagoyel, right, is called a koifer, right? Just like a person who's koifer tchias hamesim, or minim, or apikosim, koifer b'Torah, etc., etc. So in other words, the Rambam understood that this is one of the important foundations, one of the important axioms of Jewish belief, because the Rambam equates with minim and tchias hamesim. In fact, actually, if we actually go through this list, we'll see that in fact actually the list includes the Yud Gimel Ikar. For example, the Rambam says, "Elu she'ein lahem," I'm reading once again from Halacha Vav, Perek Gimel, "Elu she'ein lahem chelek l'olam haba, Minute. Who's minute? Person says there isn't a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Person says, right? There's not one manik, but there's two. So the first one is the first Ikar. The second one is the second Ikar, right? That's the third Ikar. Okay, and then that's the fourth Ikar. So in other words, the Rambam is going through the Ikar. Then halacha ches. The Rambam says shloisha nikra apikosim. Person says no nevuah. Saying there's no nevuah is the sixth ikar, and then a person is machsh nevuah Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the eighth ikar, right? And then the Rambam says Moshe ein bo yedei ma'aseh bnei adam. That's already the 10th ikar, right? And all these people are apikosim. So the Rambam in actual Hilchot Teshuva is going through the entire list of the Yud Gimel Ikkarim. Interestingly enough is. And in one of these Ikkarim is Tchias HaMeisim, which is going to be, of course, the 13th Ikar, and the Bias HaGoyel. Bias HaGoyel is the 12th Ikar. So, the Rambam understood that Bias HaGoyel is on par, right, with all the Ikkarim. However, the Rambam here states, Umiklali Yesod Hazeh, not only do I have to believe in a Goyel, Ki ein Melech Yisrael ela miDavid. Okay? Umizera Shlomo b'yichud, v'chol mi shecholek al Dov המשפחה הזו is koyve v'Hashem d'vrei neviyav. Okay, now, I want to examine carefully the Lashon of the Rambam. The Rambam says, B'klal Yisrael hazeh, Ki ein Melech Yisrael ela miDavid. Okay? The Rambam in the Minyan HaMitzvahs, in Mitzvah Lei Sasei, Shin Samach Beis, and there the Rambam says, He she'ezrinu shelo lemois melech leilo ish elo shelo b'zera Yisrael al pi she'ager tzedek. Etc. Right? And the Rambam says, Ona malchus levad kavaya data b'ksuvi sifrei hanevuah shezacha bo David. Says the Rambam in Mitzvah Shin Samach Beis that the malchus, the mitzvah of appointing the melech, has to be from malchus Beis David, right? V'via Omru, he quotes a Kesa malchus zacha by David. So the Rambam says that the mitzvah to appoint a king, which is a mitzvah of the Torah, is, in fact, actually only from David HaMelech. Ein melech l'mi sheyam b'teras Moshe Rabbeinu ad Elohim ela b'zera David b'zera Shlomo levad. So usually the Rambam mentions, right, whoever believes in teras Moshe Rabbeinu, right, will believe that he can only come from Zera David or Zera Shlomo levad. V'chol mishus is also Zera Zera nechbad in Malchus nochi klinen bei. K'misha kol mishu mezula Zera Amri zah klinen bei. In other words, whoever else is not from this is called a nochi, and there's an issa in the Torah. Now, of course, who is the Rambam repeats? The Rambam mentions Shlomo here. And also too in the Ikkarim, I think in the Ikkarim, Hashemag also mentions Shlomo. Why? Because I think that the Christians believe that Oisaish was from Nasan ben David. This is historical. And the Rambam is coming to exclude Oisaish that has to be from Shlomo HaMelech. And that's important. So in other words, the addition of Shlomo HaMelech is coming lafuke from who the Rambam feels to be the false messiahs, namely Oisaish, right, and afterwards from Islam. Now, the point is that Shlomo HaMelech, there is no makor in Shas, to my knowledge, it has to be Derech Shlomo. And the Rambam, in fact, doesn't mention Shlomo HaMelech in the Mishnah Torah. He just mentions last the Malchus Beis David. And in fact, the Rambam in Halacha Dalet, in Parak Aleph, says explicitly, "In Yamod Melech B'Beis David." Right? And he speaks about it, right? Af Yeshua Hanotzri Shediv Yosef and Mashiach v'nod Beis Didin Kavadas Nabbe v'Niniel U'v'nei Pritzi Amcha Yinasu La'amid Chazim Nechshalo. The Rambam speaks about this Mikshol, and this was responsible La'abed Yisrael B'Chorev. Okay, but the Rambam here only mentions David HaMelech. I think that Shlomo HaMelech here was probably put in. I think there was a claim that it was from Gezer Nosson ben David, and the Rambam was coming through. But once again, it's interesting that it appears in the Rambam in the Parish of Mishnayos, here in the Ikkarim. It appears actually in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, and it appears in the Gezer Shemad, but the Rambam does not include Shlomo ben David as being a Tanai for the Mashiach. But we'd have to assume that the Rambam is just. I understand that. Okay, in any case. Now, what I want to just do is I want to speak about the Chol Mi Shecholik Al Dova Mishpacha Azois Chayfa Ba'Hashem with Divrei Nevuah. The Rambam explains that this is Chayfa Ba'Hashem over Divrei Neviah. As explained before, Divrei Neviah is all the Nevi'im, and Chayfa Ba'Hashem will clearly be because it's in Teras Moshe. The point is that we see clearly in the Rambam that the belief in Mashiach, the Rambam, I want to go back to what it says, involves avosei vatfila olav. In other words, the Rambam understands that the halacha is not only to believe, but the halacha is to long for him. And, okay, in other words, in the Sefer Halacha, right, in the Sefer Halacha, I understand that part of the halachas of Mashiach is to long for him. I mean, the Chavetz Chaim, as we all know, wrote a Sefer Tzipis of Yeshua, but in fact, actually, a person has to engage in things. But what does the longing for Mashiach have to do with the Yud Gimel Ikar? Either believe or I don't believe. Okay? Now, it could be that the Rambam is just saying that I shouldn't be mechashiv the kids. It's part of what he said previously, and that I still have to long for him. But I find that hard to understand that, in fact, actually, that was, in other words, the Rambam certainly doesn't include that in part of Mishnah Torah, which he speaks about the prohibition of mechashiv kids. What is the role of the Yelamim through Olav? And so, what I would understand in the Rambam, right, is that we've spoken about the Yud Gimel Ikar as being beliefs, but I want to claim that beliefs are not just intellectual beliefs. Beliefs are not intellectual beliefs. Beliefs can also be existential. The Rambam understands that part of what is defined as being a Jew is not only his intellectual beliefs, but in fact is an existential manifestation of beliefs, which is also called beliefs. I'm using a very yeshivish language. In other words, a person's existential mode, his posture, is also included in beliefs. A person doesn't pray and long for the Mashiach. That's not called believing in Mashiach, according to the Rambam. And it's very interesting, there's a reminder of Ben Yena, famous Ben Yena in Blachos. The Gemara says, speaks about Samichas Gulat Tefillah. And the Ben Yena says that Samichas Gulat Tefillah is an expression of our belief in our bitachon HaKadosh Baruch. According to Ben Yena, the halacha, right, becomes one with belief. And I claim over here, we see in the Rambam the same type of a thing too. Longing In other words, the belief in Mashiach is not only intellectual belief, but it's a longing. Longing, the existential posture that a person exhibits, right, with respect to the Messianic era, is also called a belief. That's, I think, what the Rambam is doing. And this goes, in other words, this very, very much is important what we said in the last Ikar. We said that the Rambam wasn't only speaking, to Chachamim. Well, actually, in Mishnah understood. But the Rambam understood that longing is also, in a certain sense, a type of belief. Just like the Rambam speaks about Avas Hashem, the Rambam says it's Avas Hashem, the Rambam says it in Hilchot Teshuva, you say Torah, is not only an intellectual love, but a person has to pursue this intellectual love. So here too, I think what the Rambam is introducing, very interesting, in Ikkarim, is not only that an Ikar is an intellectual belief, but it's an existential expression, which in a certain sense for the Rambam counts as a belief too. Okay, so with this, I think we...
What is it? I'm not clear what Rav Trubus means by the word belief in this concept. What's the difference between belief and existential expression?
Well, for example, the Rambam, it's interesting, the Rambam in Perek Gimel, in Hilchot Teshuva, speaks about who is an apikaris, a person who says. It's partial there in the Rambam that the ones listed in the Rambam are actually people who say things, who declare things. The Rambam, we mentioned, Hilchot Melachim, Perek Beis, mentioned a person who should think. So see already, I mean, we didn't speak this in detail, but the Rambam distinguishes between, in my opinion, there's no contradiction. It might be that the first Ikkarim, belief in God or belief in his incorporeality, are beliefs expressed through thought. Could possibly be that, the other things that Rambam mentions in Hilchot Teshuva, the belief there is a person becomes an apikaris or a min, or apikaris only, in fact, actually, if he declares something. In other words, could possibly when the Rambam speaks about beliefs, two types of beliefs. There's beliefs in thought and declarations. I want to say over here, belief in Mashiach doesn't only entail intellectual belief, but is actually a longing. In other words, a person who longs for Mashiach is called a person who believes in Mashiach, and that's the 12th Ikar.
By existential, then you mean non-intellectual?
Right, right, non-intellectual. Right, not philosophical. In other words, Mashiach, says the Rambam, is basically not a philosophical.
It's a feeling.
It's a feeling. It's a longing.
Right.
It's an existential. In other words, when the Rambam says Ikkarim, there's a spectrum. The first Ikkarim, right? Philosophical. From, probably you say that Arvi, are not philosophical, as we explained, but they basically based upon our tradition, based upon tradition. Right? Divorce Moshe, etc., etc. However, in Yosef and Mashiach, certainly the belief is based upon Nevi'ah. It's part of belief in Nevuah. But the Rambam says to believe in it's going to happen is not enough. What's called the Ikar is to long for it. A person to long for Mashiach. And this a Jew doesn't long for Mashiach, right? As felt in the 12th, sorry, let's say that in English, no, he's lacking in the 12th principle of faith. And I think this is really what comes out in the Rambam, is that to be a Jew, not only are there intellectual criteria, and criteria based upon tradition, but also existential too. So in other words, Ikar, in a certain sense, span the entire spectrum, from the philosophical to the traditional, and to the existential. And maybe we'll speak about that when we sum up the Ikkarim. But until then, from an undisclosed place, Yerushalayim Kodesh, be well.